ready? Okay. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics. My name is Jacob McCarty, and I am a sophomore here studying political science, public administration, and leadership studies. This is my second year on the Student Advisory Board and my first year as a discussion group coordinator. I have enjoyed my time here at the Dole Institute with my involvement in volunteering, attending events, and engaging in bipartisan conversations and its relation to politics. The Student Advisory Board is a bipartisan group whose members can access many great opportunities through their involvement with the Institute, including volunteering at programs, networking with our special guests, and professional development opportunities. If you are a student and would like to join the Student Advisory Board, please email us at dolesab@ku.edu or speak with a student worker after the program. A video of today's program will be available on our YouTube channel. You can also access videos of past programs by visiting our YouTube channel. A loop hearing system is available to use if you have a T-coil hearing aid. We have a limited number of listening devices. If you have questions about the loop system or at any time during the program you have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members. After the program, we will have some time for the audience to ask questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and a student worker with a microphone will come to you. Please stand if you are able and ask just one brief question. If you are a part of a virtual audience, you may submit your questions at dolequestions@ku.edu. The Dole's Institute mission is to foster civil and respectful discussions around important and often difficult topics. Please phrase your questions with this in mind. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. Now please join me in welcoming Audrey Coleman.
Thank you so much, Jacob. It's great to see you all this afternoon. This is the third installment of Sherry and Luke's, third and final installment of their discussion group. And so I want to be sure and thank both of them for their time and effort and collegiality, both with each other and also with the staff and students and the community at the Dole Institute. So would you please join me in giving some appreciation to them? I want to be sure and invite you all back to the Dole Institute tomorrow evening at 6:30. We have our event, our annual counselors event, our debate mock trial style program. The topic is, should the draft be reinstated? Pedro Aragongray and Ed Duckers will be back along with a wonderful panel arguing for and against the draft. It's an interesting topic. It will be a fascinating program, and we hope you can join us tomorrow evening. Next week, we will have our final installment of discussion group with John Shorman. We'll be breaking down the Kansas election cycle and the results next Wednesday here at 4 o'clock. So we're glad you're here. We look forward to a fascinating discussion this afternoon. Luke and Sherry, thank you again for being with us, and I'll pass the floor to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. So you brought it up. So let's kind of start there. One of our last conversations when we were together. How many folks were here last time when we were together? So about half the room. I guess we probably ought to stop and before I just start talking, say who we are, right? So I'm Luke Messer. I'm a whole bunch of things, including a former Republican member of Congress from Indiana's 6th Congressional District.
And I'm Sherry Bustos. I was a 5-term member of Congress from the state of Illinois, a Democrat, but in a Trump district, so which is somewhat unique these days. I just left office last year, a year ago, January, so I'm pretty fresh out. But it's good to see the returning folks, and it is also good to see new faces. So thank you. Thanks for being here.
So in our last conversation, for those of you who were with us, we sort of made bold predictions on where we thought the next week or so was going to unfold, and so let's start with that. So
we'll roll the tape, so you can. So I was right on only one thing, and that was that I predicted that the Republicans would take the Senate. And so that is what happened, but that was not that hard of a prediction because I think most people throughout the country were predicting that same thing. I said I thought Democrats would win back the House. but that it would be a slim majority. What we're seeing, I think there's still a handful of races in California that have not yet been called, but it is likely, almost certain that Republicans will hang on to the majority in the House, although it could be even a slimmer majority than they've had for the last couple years. And then I predicted that Kamala Harris would win. That was based on, I can't remember, was that the really bad week that Trump had? Was that when we were here, when he just had like a horrible closing week before the election? I think it was,
No, that was kind of part of our conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought that his closing week was so terrible. I thought that the women voters would push Kamala Harris over the top. And we had talked a little bit about her ground game, that it was viewed as something that was all ready to go to get people out to the polls. So that was my prediction. Obviously, now we know how it turned out. But Luke, you want to talk about your prediction and why?
As you remember, it wasn't as if I was some cocky, bold person up here telling y'all you were wrong, but I was reluctant to even make a prediction. But then when Sherry made such a clear prediction, I felt like I had to tell you what I really had on my heart and what I thought I saw coming. And for those of you who were there, you'll remember I said I thought that the issue matrix towards the end of the campaign swung in the wrong direction. I thought it was a big mistake. I said that then to call Trump a fascist, that it rang to folks that had lived through that presidency 4 years before and were inclined to at least consider voting to him. It rang kind of like, well, wait a minute, it wasn't, the Gestapo wasn't at my door then. I'll tell you something I think I missed at that time and that I've picked up even more since then is, you might recall as that conversation was going on, I made the comment that I assume that's a base play, that it's sort of Kamala trying to tell her own base they need to turn out, and that kind of, because it wasn't really an argument that was going to persuade new people. I think something I missed, and clearly the Harris campaign missed, is I think it became almost a reverse turnout mechanism, because I think there were a fair number of voters who thought, if I was voting in this election, I might vote for Donald Trump, but, I'm not really a big fan of a bunch of his other behaviors and other things. And in the end, when he was called a fascist, they heard you calling them a fascist for even being willing to consider that they should be voting for him. And so I think in the end, it ended up even driving his own turnout up. At the time I predicted, I thought in those swing states, at least across the Midwest, that the issue matrix was going to cut in a way where he would win the presidency. Frankly, the results were bigger and broader than I would have imagined in essentially every one of the competitive states, except which one? Forgive me for not. But
in all the swing states,
yeah.
I think he took all of them.
Yeah.
I think Trump took every
in the
single
end,
one of them.
and if you look at his election results, there's almost every community in America he did better than he did 4 years before. So anyway, and with that, then the obvious implication was that the Senate would be close, but that Republicans would have a chance of winning both.
Something interesting, I read that in some of the focus groups when audiences were asked about, do you think Donald Trump is an authoritarian? And they said the most common response to that is, what is an authoritarian? So when you talk about a fascist, I remember I worked with a woman, I was working in healthcare at the time, and we had somebody who was a vice president of the health system, and she didn't like somebody in my office, and she called her a fascist. And I had other people in my office saying, what is a fascist? Yeah. So you think about, this terminology and this language that was used to call Donald Trump names. In my own races, again, I told you I was a Democrat in a Trump district. Our view, how we ran our campaigns, is we didn't talk about Donald Trump. Our view is that everybody knew who Donald Trump was. They knew what he stood for. They could see him in action. They saw how he ran his campaign in the 2016 race. They saw how he was running his campaign going into 2020. We had lived through 4 years of that. So our view is, why even talk about Donald Trump? We all know what he is. Yeah. And I think one of the lessons of the Harris campaign is they probably talked about him a little too much. I think that's one of the lessons.
Or at least didn't talk about other things that needed to be talked about. It's interesting, again, because folks like us who would travel in here to be in the Dole Center, which we admire great, folks like you who in the days after the election would be willing to come to a room and listen to folks like us even talk about it. Almost by definition, right, we're really engaged. We have political philosophies. We care about these things. And I think something that is another reminder is even in a world where the folks that decide the election may be getting smaller and smaller, meaning that most of us are in one tribe or the other and we're voting our tribe, and maybe it used to be 15% of the people that swung and now it might only be 5. I don't know, however many percent it is that's sort of deciding from election to election. Those folks almost always vote their pocketbook. Those folks care about the economy. Those folks are living in a day-to-day world where they don't know fancy words like fascist, right? They just know that, hey, you know what? Like, I'm having a harder time this year than I did last year. Inflation's really hurt me. And it, you know, I think that those folks in this election, you know, if you look back at the last several cycles, you know, there was an economy today that, you know, I think in a lot of ways, the Harris, and this is a room that would remember the George Herbert Walker Bush campaign, but if you remember that campaign against Clinton, very famously, George Herbert Walker Bush was looking at all the data and saying, things are getting better. What are you guys talking about, you know? And Clinton was out there saying, it's the economy, stupid. People weren't feeling it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, you could go back to almost every one of these change elections and back to 92, and including, by the way, the 2020 election, and realize that it's probably people who were looking for a better life and felt like the existing team wasn't serving them well.
So I'm curious, there's a lot of articles out there now and podcasts and social media that are deep diving what went wrong for the Democrats and what went right for the Trump team. And I don't know about you, Luke, but there are some that are really resonating with me as I read those, where, again, when I look at my own campaigns and what we did that worked well, and I remember that very early on, I put together this proposal for the presidential campaign. This was a year and a half ago, so very early on. And it was a rural swing state strategy that I said, I think you should take a look at this, and this is how I think you should take a look at your campaign and how you even put together your platform. And Patrick, you might relate to this. You guys know Patrick Schmidt, who is a newly elected official here. Is this your area? Do you represent this area?
Not this part, but the 19th state Senate district is Northwest Lawrence.
And
East of People.
Did you overperform other Democrats in your race?
We haven't seen all the data.
Okay.
Yeah, the curing is still happening, so we just haven't seen the final
Yeah.
data.
Well, so you might be able to relate to this, but here was my advice. Go to the swing congressional districts in the swing states and go to farms, go to microbreweries, go to different locations that are emblematic of those areas, and just listen. Ask people what's going well in their lives, what's not going well in their lives. Is there anything that the Biden administration has done that you really like? And are there things that you really don't like? Ask these open-ended questions and see what people say and formulate your platform based on what people are saying. That was my advice, and that was March or April of last year. So plenty of time to execute on this. And here's what happened. I kept getting shopped around, and I was going to people, there was a cabinet secretary in the room, there was one of the top people in the administration in the room. There were the right people that I was presenting this to. At the end of the conversation, really, really like it. I'm going to have you go talk to these people. Go talk to those people. That took like maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks to get to those people.
Yeah.
Did that. After that, really like this idea. We want you to go talk to these people. Did that 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks later. So at this point, we were into August, which would have been a year before the convention. Okay, so kept getting pushed off. Finally, I get pushed off to another person who apologized to me for getting ping-ponged around and said, you know we owe you an answer on executing on this. And you know what the answer was? No answer. So when I read these postmortems and these columns and all of this, I just think it didn't have to be this way.
Well, I think that's for sure. Can I ask a couple questions of the group? How many of you were surprised by the outcome of the election? Like just genuinely surprised. How many of you, and I mean this will be a hard question, but I think I'm really asking, how many of you within a couple weeks of the election had a lengthy conversation of sincerity with somebody who you know voted the other way? Okay. How many of you have, after the election, had a lengthy conversation of sincerity with somebody who voted the other way, right? And I mean, again, right, like this is a pretty self-select crowd. We're all here willing to be at this thing. You know, I can tell you that, one, I admire that. Two, I think there's a lot of folks that didn't do either of those things. And we all live in this world where I was talking to the Uber driver today who voted very differently than me in the election. He was talking to me about how, you know, almost all of us, our first source of information today is not a person. It's this little box that, you know, and it's almost like having a conversation with a human is about the fourth level of way that you would actually kind of start to ponder with yourself how these things happen. And look, there's parts of it that baffle me. I mean, this is my third time here. Those of you who've been here, you know. I mean, I'm not like the biggest Trump apologist in America. I mean, I'm just not. But I think there's a lot that the leaders of this country and the folks that believe in the institution of this country have to ask themselves. You know, I see young people in this room. I see older folks in this room. I can tell you, well into my adulthood, I wanted credit for my intentions, not my results. I felt like, you know what, if I was trying to do the right thing by you and somehow I kind of messed up, we should really judge me by what I meant to do. Not the fact that, you know, I wrecked your car or that, you know, something else happened, right? And I think if we're honest with ourselves as kind of a leadership crowd in our country, we want a lot of credit for our intentions. And the American people are sitting here saying, wait a minute. I mean, yeah, it seems like this place is working pretty well. By the way, for an increasingly large margin of people doing extraordinarily well, right? But the middle of America and a lot of folks feel like they're being let down. And I can tell you, like when you talk to folks about, well, okay, what do you think of all Trump's behavior? Well, I don't like his behavior. I don't like all those people's behavior either. Well, I mean, do you think he lies? I think he lies. Did you see Joe Biden in the debate? They told me he was okay. They told me he was okay for years, and then he walked on the stage and he couldn't put together two sentences in an hour, and it's the first time we discovered as Americans. Seemed to me like they were lying to me about that, right? And so again, like if you remember when we were all together, I said to you all, let's not allow ourselves to look at the worst characterization of the other side and say, well, that's why they voted for him. I mean, people have real questions about what's going on in this country, and essentially they decided that one option full of flaws was better than the other option full of flaws. By the way, right, in a divided nation by a few tens of thousands of votes in some key places, right? Like, let's not kid ourselves that like this was some landslide one direction or another. But by the way, neither was 2020 and neither was 2016, right? Like, this is what's been going on for a while. I mean, the American people keep telling us, hey, you're not figuring it out, okay? More or less, I just want to live in a country where I have a chance to succeed, where I more or less get left alone, and I don't have to worry about, you know, saying the wrong thing and getting in big trouble.
How many of you think that that was a big problem for the Democrats, what Luke just said? This fear of saying the wrong thing, and raise your hands if you think that is a problem for the Democratic Party. Not so much. Interesting. Say that again? No. I'm saying for the party. So right now, as I said, the Democratic Party is doing a deep dive. This is what happens every presidential cycle, and frankly, even the midterms. When a party bombs, when a party underperforms, there's typically this deep dive that is done. So if I'm involved in those discussions, what do you want me to report back to the Democratic Party? What is the Democratic Party doing that is hurting the Democratic Party? So if you're a candidate and you've got a D by your name, and if that's hurting you, what does the party need to do? And shout out anything that you think that the party...
What are you hearing from your friends? If you talk to somebody who voted the other way, what are you hearing?
And we've got a mic here if anybody wants to share their thoughts.
They need to talk more.
Democrats need to talk more? What does that mean?
Talk more about the Republicans and what they're actually doing.
You think that, so you think more should be said about Donald Trump?
Yeah, we're too easy.
Okay, all right.
We need to be tougher.
Okay. At exit polls, that didn't prove to be helpful. Just FYI. Okay, other thoughts? Oh, we got several over here. And over here too.
Oh, excuse me. I think, or I'm going to put this for you to talk about.
Yeah, and we'll respond to your guys' what you're saying.
Misogynistic, racial, Christian right. And she was not going to win if she presented a decent campaign. Just because she called him a fascist, most people don't know what a fascist is.
Yeah.
She wasn't calling the Republican, but neither here nor there, the tail end of this thing, the man was, I'm not going to go down that, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, that last
think
week
it's
was
racial,
horrendous, wasn't
I
it?
think it's misogynistic, and I think it's the Christian right. So
You think that's why the Democrats are losing?
that's why they lost this election.
Uh-huh, okay.
And you can come up with, I don't even listen to anybody say that this is what they did wrong. They shouldn't have called him a fascist. They shouldn't have done this. That's not important, because when he nominated her to be his vice president, she was a black woman, and that was like maybe that one.
With all due respect, you really, in an election where a quarter of black men, half of Latino men, significant percentages of African American women, more
Young
suburban
people.
women, by 2 points, more suburban women voted for Trump before. Almost 50% of Gen Z voted for Donald Trump. I mean, I'm not trying to be, but like.
Well, that's why I asked the question.
Well, so
I won't change my opinion.
I think the other thing we should throw out there, so what did Democrats do wrong? What did Trump do right? Like, to have this outcome. And that's what he's saying.
With respect to the Latino vote, the Gen Z vote is a completely different issue. Don't lump the two together. I mean, what the Democratic Party needs to do with respect to women's place and perception in politics and what they need to do to appeal to Gen Z are two completely different things, in my opinion.
Okay, other thoughts? What went right, what went wrong?
Opinion, the biggest problems for Democrats is that independents and Republicans just straight up don't believe what Republicans are promising to do. Like when Trump promises to deport people, they say, he's not gonna do it. He lied so much before. Like it's and then when he wins and announces all these cabinet picks, they're so surprised. Like how can this be happening? And I'm not really sure what Democrats can be doing about this. But it's the main theme should be trust the worst things the Republicans are promising to you, like from their own words.
Okay.
I think the Democrats need to hold primary elections that aren't manipulated by party leadership.
Ooh, very interesting. She said Democrats should hold primary elections that are not manipulated by the party. The view that all of the primaries, Biden was baked in, then got out, so Kamala gets in as the nominee without a single primary election vote. I think that's your point. That rubbed people the wrong way.
No,
All right, let's do, how many more, raise your hand if you, and then let's quit, and then Luke and I are going to react to what you guys are saying. Okay?
Kamala didn't talk about the fact how good the economy was doing. And then I think the other thing that the Democrats focused way too much on identity issues and stuff like that, as opposed to talking about general issues which affect people. And I mean, I think Kamala, coming out of the convention, that was fine, that message was fine, but then you ditch that. I mean, during the entire last 2 months, she said the same thing over and over and over, which is great. Everyone gets that, but it doesn't communicate, okay, what am I going to do to you to help you get by?
Yeah.
And that's where I think she blew it.
It reminded me of a candidate who ran for Congress, and I did a lot of campaigning with this person a few cycles ago, and my husband pointed out that this person's speech from the day they announced that they were running until the day of the election never changed. There was never a new message, and so didn't evolve as a candidate, didn't evolve messaging, and that's typically not a winning proposition. There's back there and then over here.
Did you see Jon Stewart's interview with Heather Cox Richardson? She had an interview, she's an historian, and she attributed the problem to propaganda, something like this gentleman was saying, that the propaganda now overwhelms the truth, and we don't have the tools to fight back when there's a lot of lies being bantered about.
Because the right-wing social media apparatus is more robust than the middle, yes, or the, okay.
Yeah, Fox News, Breitbart, they now dominate.
I want to hear Luke's reaction to that after we hear from her, and then we'll.
I wanted to hear more from the Democrats about how we are an inclusive nation and we like our immigrants coming here because we can't manage feedlots. We can't hire people to roof our houses and paint them. We can't hire people to work in nursing homes. We like immigrants coming here, and we didn't talk about that. I also want us to stress more what happened during COVID. Good heavens, look at all the people that got subsidies for, so they wouldn't foreclose on their home, so that they could have rent paid for 18 months. None of that really spilled over to, yeah, it's so bad for you, but many people benefited and continued to benefit. So I don't understand how the economy becomes such a huge issue. We've got 2% unemployment. We remember when interest rates were 9% in the 1970s, and people still bought houses somehow. I don't know, how does that work?
Did the transgender attack ad that ran during NFL games matter to people? Did that? Yeah, I heard so much talk about that. It was. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? The attack ad that Trump had against Kamala. Yeah, I remember the first time I saw it. I was watching a Bears game, and you know, it's in her own words saying about people who are in prison and taxpayer dollars being paid for people to transition their genders. And I was sitting next to my husband, and I said, wow, that was a very effective attack ad. My guess is that will make a difference. And I think that we're hearing that it did make a difference for some people, that it hurt her race, Kamala Harris's race. But Luke, I'm curious as to what you think.
So what's your reaction to all of that before I give my reaction?
On the attack ad?
No, just the feedback.
Oh, look, I mean, I think, again, this is in hindsight. Two of my three predictions were wrong, so this is in hindsight. But I think back to the James Carville argument for Clinton, it's about the economy, and it is how people feel, not necessarily using the statistics about unemployment rates being down, that inflation was getting under control. I remember going the week of election thinking, oh, gas prices are way down. That's great. I drive a lot. I live in a small area, so I'm on the road a lot. And I remember thinking, well, that's encouraging, but it is how people feel. And they did not feel that things were getting better for them. And I think especially about the young people. you know, young people, Luke, I mean, you've got kids, I've got kids. It is hard. Like, you think about them buying a house, the student loan debt, the going out to dinner, going out for drinks. It is so expensive. I don't know how younger people even afford things. So I don't know. I think it was more that. And I do think that I'm going to use the term woke things for Democrats. I think it hurts the Democratic Party. Again, I have a district that had 10,000 family farms. It's very rural. Yeah. And I think the things, the defund the police, which the transgender talk, I think those things are hurtful if you have a D next to your name and you're running in a swing district.
There is like so much that comes in to all that's said, and I want to give a couple reactions, and I mean it like I'm so appreciative of this dialogue. Sherry tells me I need to quit talking about this, but I remember our first time together, and I said we need civility and truth, and there was applause, and somebody asked me this hard question, and I gave a lousy answer. I just didn't do a good enough job, and I really keep racking my brain about what I can do to be more of a beacon of civility and truth. But I just implore everyone, neither party has a monopoly on civility and truth.
True.
No one, you know, what, Trump got 75 million votes, and Kamala got 65 or 68. I bet there aren't a few million people that thought both sides were doing civility and truth, right? That their side was, and the other people being fair too. I mean, and like, it just, like, I'm sorry for even my quick response to you, but I like one of my comments I've said back in the Obama election, and I was a commentator on local TV the night Barack Obama was elected, and it turned out that a college classmate of mine who was an African-American young gentleman was on the other side. And he said, and I mean, I said even on the air, like, I appreciate the sincerity with which you say that, and I know your life experience is not my life experience, but he said on that day, he never believed that an African-American could be elected president in our country. And I said, I always knew we could. I actually thought they would be a Republican because I thought it'd make it kind of easier because, you know, there'd be the conservative and the philosophy and it'd be different. But I always knew we could. Now, again, I didn't have his life experience. That doesn't make his life experience not real. But if I had said, when was Obama elected? 2008? Mm-hmm. Okay. If I was a political consultant in 2006 and I said, I got the perfect candidate for you, okay? It's this urban guy who's African-American, you know, he's not going to put on a flannel shirt. He more or less looks like he's going into his urban office everywhere he goes. That's just kind of his style and where he works. And here's the best part. His name, it rhymes with Osama. Remember that guy that kind of blew up that big building a little while ago? You'd have said never. Okay, but in America, it happened, right? And so his
middle name is Hussein, by the way.
And it really is, even though everybody gets mad at Trump for saying that. But I mean, it really is, okay? Yeah. And my point is this, is that 75 million people didn't forget what America is. That's not what happened. So then we got to ask ourselves, I'm not saying nobody did, by the way. I'm just saying he won, and he won by a lot, and he won almost everywhere. And, you know, like Chuck Todd, who is a very interesting thing to say when I say about he won almost everywhere, Chuck Todd says, you know, you really want to know what's going on in an election? Look where no campaign was run. So really, Kamala did better in the places that were swing seats where there were, you know, better compared to where her campaign ran, which is an argument that she ran a pretty decent campaign. Places where there were no campaigns, almost everywhere she did worse than typically happens. So what was that about? What I think it's about, and I think what everybody has to own, is that the economy challenge is real, and there's a lot of folks, if you're not college educated in this economy, you don't feel secure, and that's a reality. And again, back to this comment, we all want credit for our intentions, not our results. A whole lot of people feel like the leaders of this country let them down. 2, they feel like there's liars all over the place. And if we're honest with ourselves, there's evidence of that. It's not just made up. And that doesn't mean his lies aren't worse or whatever. I'm just saying they're all over the place, and we all have to own that. And three, and I'm going to make this a very personal comment, very personal. And this is no judgment on the kindness of all of you in this room. But you know, after our conversation 2 weeks ago, and Audrey can tell you, I called her and Sarah and was kind of like checking back in and making sure that like I wasn't in trouble because I had some conversations, and that's how and I will tell you in complete candor, like I wasn't processing it in like what that meant for the election, but after the election, and I mean, I'm pretty prosperous, I'm kind of okay. It's pretty hard for you all to cancel me. Nobody in Indiana would care anyway if you did, probably, but I'm just saying, and that's me, okay?
Did you get some negative feedback, or what made you feel that way?
I'm just telling you that in this, if you're coming at it from the conservative point of view in this country right now, you feel like I say the wrong thing at the office and I can be canceled.
Well,
and
it's the same thing being a Democrat, though, too.
I think that when you're in charge, like, you know, Ronald Reagan won talking about crazy liberals when the liberals were in charge. Barack Obama, well, you know, later the Tea Party people became the people everybody was scared of. And then the last 4 years, it's the other way. And I'm not saying that, by the way, that like that's the only legitimate reality. I'm just saying like you may not have heard that from people, but understand that there are a lot of people in this country that they don't feel like it's, they feel like there's pressure both ways. And I'm not saying people on the left don't feel like they can't say, you know, but anyway.
I think it's a social media thing now. You know, I do. I think that if you say something that is out of sync with, if you're a Democrat and you're saying something that's out of sync with the Democratic Party, then you will get attacked. If you say something that is out of sync with the Republican Party, you're probably going to get attacked. I mean, I think it's the reality of social media these days.
Yes.
Do you guys want to talk about like what's going to happen now out in D.C.? Like if there's going to be new member orientation, that's the new thing. So all of the new members, I don't know if you saw the pictures of the new senators who are out in D.C. right now. I know Ruben Gallego, because his race was called so late in Arizona, took a red eye, is out there with the other brand new Democratic members of the Senate. The Republicans will do the same. A lot of new member orientation is done separately, so you got Democrats who do their thing, Republicans who do their thing. I think where we went together, did we go to Harvard together, the Kennedy School? I think you do that together. Their leadership elections, the Senate had their leadership elections today, the Senate Republicans. The House members they'll be voting here pretty soon. New members get to vote. So again, I don't think there's going to be any change in the leadership. The top three on the Republican side will be the same. The top three on the Democratic side will be the same.
You have a very narrow majority, and it's going to get more narrow if Donald Trump keeps appointing members of Congress to cabinet positions. I mean, it may only be a 4 or 5 seat majority anyway. So some of those offices might not get appointed for a while either, you know, as they try to roll some things out. And there's some theory, you know, probably I'll talk a moment or two about kind of how Trump rolls and operates. We'll get to that at a certain point.
And then, you know, you are seeing the names kind of come out now as far as the cabinet. Did you guys see the one for Attorney General today? Reaction to that? Good choice?
Why do you think Sherry started with that one?
Well, because it's like, I was shocked by it.
Yeah.
Patrick?
How does Susan Collins vote for that?
Well, look, I think it'll be kind of I think there's a bunch of different dynamics that will be fascinating in the next 4 years, right? So Trump is a second-term president in many ways, right? This is his second term. He served before. Look, it's his show. It's his party. You know, there's no doubt about that. And yet he won't have a second. You know, he doesn't have another reelect, right? So in some ways, there's a bunch of different factors at play as to how some of these senators respond.
But he can lose, what, 4 now? Because it's 54, right? There are 54 Republicans in the Senate. So he can lose 4 votes.
I think it's 53, isn't it?
Or is it 53?
But he can lose 3. And I
so
still
he
think
could lose Collins, he could lose Murkowski, and get everybody else and be fine.
Yeah. And I think, look, the media is still out there, and by that I mean kind of all of media, social media, not necessarily mainstream anymore. You know, people are going to have to withstand public scrutiny. That's part of what happens with these appointments. Sometimes people make it, sometimes they don't. I do think there's some patterns you see in the people that Trump's appointed.
I'm looking for ways that I can actually think, you know what, that's kind of a good idea. As names are coming out and as ideas are coming out. And I'm going to tell you what I am kind of interested in seeing what comes out of it, is this government efficiency office. Okay, so he's got the world's richest man who is obsessed about efficiency in his own businesses, who is going to be running this office of efficiency. And who has also said he's going to cut, what's he said, $2 trillion from the budget? What percentage is that of the budget? Do you know? I mean, it's like a lot, right? Is it like cutting something like a third of the federal budget, something like that? So look, he could do a lot of damage, but it will be interesting to see what he comes up with. That's one I'm thinking. I hope that there are some good ideas that come out of that. The first bill that I introduced after I was elected was asking the Government Accountability Office to take a look at all of the duplicated services within the federal government and cut out any duplication. Because I think there is a lot of waste.
Sure.
So I think that's one that I'm thinking there's a lot of damage that could be done out of these ideas, but it could be a whole remaking of the federal government that maybe will be interesting. So yeah. I don't know, is there anything that you're
there's
thinking
like
that this could be really, really good?
You know, I think I said this last time we were there, like one of my favorite post-election thoughts I've heard of Alphonse D'Amato say when he was beaten by Chuck Schumer, and he was quoting an alderman who said, "The voters have spoken, the bastards." Right? Right, and it's just a reminder that like this crazy system of government, man, it's worked for 230 years and it's going to keep working. And you have to look at the end of every election. I've won some, I've lost some. I'm not undefeated like my colleague here. And you know, like you have to evaluate and ask why. And and I just think the more we tell ourselves that the reason that we lost was because the people are bad, then even if we're right, that's not going to move the country forward. Like you have to think about how do you make it better. So here's the thing I think that's intriguing is, look, with some notable exceptions that you very graciously started with, like most of these folks are pretty normal folks, okay, that he's nominated. All right, and they may not be exactly somebody who's lockstep with me or with someone else. You know, Sherry and I were sort of saying, I won't speak for her, I'll speak for me. But it is interesting is, you know, I grew up in small town Indiana and saw all these titans that were named, you know, cabinet heads, and I was convinced they must be brilliant. I mean, how could they have not gotten picked for that? Well, we now know a lot of these people, you know what I mean? And there are many of them very capable people, but not, you know, they're normal people, you know what I mean, with all the challenges that being a normal person has. So to me, I kind of think, I wonder if all these titans I thought might have been a whole lot more normal than I thought they were too, right? Like some of that is part of life. I think that Trump's made some pretty clear promises. He's going to focus on those promises. I think, you know, one interesting thing, the Trump tax cuts expiring, it was going to in part be a Hakeem Jeffries problem if there was a Democratic House, because raising taxes at the beginning and not working right now, that's going to be almost entirely a Republican problem. They've got all of the branches of government. The Democrats don't necessarily have to help them, so they're going to have to get that done. That will require some capital. Trump's made very, you know, if you ask folks, what did he promise? He's promised to get secure on the border. Now, you know, it's interesting, your comments notwithstanding on the border, the toughest time of the last 8 years on the border was the last year. I mean, Joe Biden would tell you that. The immigration, the deportations and the lack of immigration in the last year was the toughest time of the last 8 years. And again, there's a difference between like the rhetoric that we sometimes use and like the reality. And that's pretty much just, you can read it, Google it. If you don't believe me, it's pretty much objective fact. So I think in some ways for Trump, that's helpful because he can kind of keep those policies going, but I think there will be a big focus there. I think the challenge will be, and look, history it's not required to repeat itself, but it often does, right? And I would tell you that over and over again, even Obama, who recovered, he had a terrible election 2 years later, and then recovering from that with some moderation, he was able to come back and win re-election. But over and over and over again, people are convinced that they were elected for the most extreme things they said that they liked.
Yeah.
And often, right, 2020 election in hindsight was probably a whole lot about COVID. This election in hindsight was clearly a whole lot about inflation. And it will be fascinating because, the other thing about Trump is he doesn't really owe the Republican Party anything.
And he is going to be in for 4 years. He will not run for re-election, so he is not beholden really he won't have to be on the ballot again.
And so what I mean by that, right, it's not a guarantee, there was a big debate. Is he going to do Project 2025 or whatever?
Yeah.
Well, he denounced it all during the election. He doesn't know those people anything. So he might or he might not. We'll see. It'll be interesting. If you notice, the people that he's picked are largely people who their allegiance is not to Heritage Foundation or even really the Republican Party. The common denominator is they have an allegiance to him. They have said public nice things about him. And, even some of them really normal people with relatively normal careers who happen to say very nice things about him. And so it will be fascinating. I will say this, I've had friends that served in the last cabinet and have spent time with them, and without quoting anybody specifically, just something that was enlightening to me is to remember that the president is a very busy person and has a whole lot to focus on. And so these cabinet heads end up having a whole lot of authority and ability to get things done because the president's not checking. It can't be, as a practical matter. What you have to do is be ready to respond when he's interested. And then that, of course, can, and I'll use a quick insight about Trump. Two things that folks, because we're probably running out of time, but I spent time in private meetings with Trump and have been around him, and I have lots of friends that have worked with him. And, I have colleagues of mine that were elected to higher office or involved who have a couple dozen different notes and pictures and articles where they were quoted in some article and he wrote them a quick note and said, "So proud of you, great job, think you're doing well." People wonder, how does all this seem so normal? I'm telling you, in a world like, I'm going to be a little bit careful here and not put Sherry in a bad spot, but let's just say this, not a bad spot, it's not the right way to say, just not to put words in her mouth, but everyone that gets elected president isn't like the most personal person you've ever met in your life who remembers your two siblings and knows where you went to college or notices when you did a nice job on TV or wrote a nice column. They're barely lucky to remember their name. You almost figure they whispered your name in their ear, their staff did, before they saw you, for them even to say hello to you in a picture. And he is very good at being interpersonal and interacting with people.
You know who the best Democrat was at that?
Nancy Pelosi.
No, as president, though.
Oh, who?
Bill Clinton.
Yes.
Seriously, I've never known anybody that has risen to that level politically who was better at it than Bill Clinton. Hillary came to my congressional district when she was running, and she was unable to make this particular event, and so Bill Clinton was her surrogate. So I was in charge of introducing him, and I gave this. It was in Peoria, Illinois. And I introduced him, and he apparently liked it, but he calls me afterwards, and I still have the voice message on my phone. You guys want me to play it for you? I actually can if anybody wants to hear it later, but I saved it because it was I love old school politics. I love old school politics, and most people don't get that right anymore. They don't get gratitude right. They don't know how to say thank you. They don't write thank you notes after somebody has written them a check for $3,300. They don't make those phone calls. But that means a lot when people do that.
I know people who were high-level business people that dealt with him, and he lost them hundreds of millions of dollars, and they love him.
Yeah.
Because for 30 years, if they were on something or their next company was in the Wall Street Journal, they got a quick note from him. Yeah. And all I'm saying, look, again, we've been here, it's my third time, you all know I'm not some great apologist. All I'm saying is this, is that, you know, when you wonder what the mystery is, there's something there. And I would say to you, like, you know, I'm not as good at writing notes as I should be at times. It does say something. I'm not saying, if nothing else, it says you're really calculated and smart. But in a world where people matter, he's very good at that.
Well, he won the popular vote. And I don't think, nobody had that on their radars. Nobody predicted
and I'm glad
that.
we can put that argument aside for a little while,
Yeah.
because the Electoral College thing drives me bananas, but I don't want to get into that now.
Me too.
But I would.
We've got 5 minutes.
Okay, but I want to say one last thing. Another thing about him is just this. Well, okay, I'll skip it.
We got 5 minutes.
I'll
So
skip that because of that.
who's got questions for us?
Yep.
Okay,
And we
no
can
way
take
we're
it- we can
answering
go
these
10
in
if that's what it takes.
5 minutes. Can we go late, or do we want to stop at 5?
We usually
You've all
go
been
until
civil
about
and not scary,
5:15,
and
so
we
you
can
have
Say
a
that
little.
again?
We usually go until about 5:15,
Okay, we're
so
going
you
to go to
have a little
5:15.
time.
Let's ask questions.
Will be great.
Who hasn't asked anything yet? You have not, and then we'll go to the others. So, yep, here, and there. They have not asked anything yet.
Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. So I think there's a semi-general consensus that the Democratic Party has a messaging issue. I was wondering if, I guess, A, do you think it's a good idea that politicians are pivoting towards this like podcast and like the social media space? And then B, which is a separate question, but I was wondering what you think the consequences of things like the Affordable Connectivity Program and the Child Tax Credit and like the CHIPS and Science Act are going to be in this Congress, and why those things weren't talked about more, and why more Americans don't realize that that's something they're benefiting from, or something that's good for the country. That's a long question, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part about podcasts and all of that, that's not something that politicians control. It's like, this is where the public is going now, right? What was the one that Kamala was on, that Call Her Daddy, or what's that thing? Yeah, I had never heard of that. And so I listened to it. I can tell you, as somebody my age, I'm thinking, why does anybody listen to this? But that's not my demographic. Politicians have to go where the voters are. I don't know what ended up happening on the Joe Rogan thing, but if I were running for president and got invited to go to Joe Rogan, I would do it. How big is his audience? Is it 45 million people?
Yeah.
Why would you not go on something that is listened to by 45 million people? I mean, again, politically, my advice to people running for office was go where you're uncomfortable, because there are voters there who you need to figure out how you're going to win over. And so that is part of being in politics, is you've got to go someplace, you've got to go places where you're uncomfortable. Because the places where you're comfortable, those voters are already your voters. Where it's uncomfortable, those are people you got to try to win over. My goal was always to walk away and have people say, she's not that bad. That was always my goal.
It's the Big Mac theory.
Yeah.
That's how.
So I don't know if you want to address the podcast.
No, like, look, I think the podcasts are great, and I would just say this, and I think it's the hardest thing for those of us who care so much about this and get ourselves engaged enough to come to something like this, is I'd be careful with the idea that the Democratic Party just has a messaging problem. I think there's a substance problem. I think there's things you're selling people don't want. And I will tell you, like with Trump, a lot of people, I spent a lot of time in my career saying, you know, if we could just help people understand and talk better about our stuff, they would see the pure-heartedness of it. You know what? Donald Trump came in and he was anti-trade in a party that had been foreign trade. He was anti-foreign interventionist in a party that had more or less told people that, hey, you know what, sometimes there's wars we have to just, that's part of the cost in a post-World War II world. He was willing to talk about immigration in a way that most people are like, well, you can't do that. That's a killer issue. There's nobody you're going to make happy when you talk about that. The ag people will be mad at you. You know, the folks that are in those communities will be mad at you. And here he is now getting half the Latino vote with half the male Latino vote and a significant portion of female Latinos with that. So I do think that, look, I think we talked about this before, and my answer is too long, but Mitt Romney got beat, at least in part, because the Obama people beat him up on Big Bird, and the Romney people kept saying, nobody cares about PBS. But what the Obama people said later is, once we convinced people he wasn't like us, then we could get him on the things we needed that actually made a difference. And I think that's what happened with some of these more extreme versions of the social issues. It's not so much that people voted on that, but it just kind of said, huh? Like, you're on TV and I'm watching what? You know, boy, this economy's really getting me. You know what I mean? And so I think that'll be the challenge. I just would caution everybody, you know, stay tuned. We talked about the Kansas weather last time we were here. If anything, in 2 years may well be, you know, it'd be a different story.
Part two of your question, the Affordable Connectivity Program, the Inflation Reduction Act, et cetera. I mean, if there's this government efficiency thing and there's a desire to cut $2 trillion out of the budget somehow, I don't know what the future of that is. But, you know, that was, I don't know if you remember this, but the funding for that program stopped. And Democrats were in favor of continuing it. It was on the other side of the aisle that was not in favor of continuing it. So it was already a party problem. And so with Republicans having every lever of power in Washington, my guess is it's dead, but
yeah, I'm going to say this in a sort of clever way, but I don't mean it that clever. Trump has never demonstrated himself to be uncomfortable with debt, okay? So color me a little skeptical that like they're going to be like just gutting things just to gut them. I will say this, there is a fair amount of these programs that ended up being just big giant handouts to
corporations?
To communities, well, corporations and communities that happen to vote Democratic, right? And so I think those monies that are unspent, you could see big chunks of those goes away because it's seen more philosophic, you know, more as a part of the battle. But I think as far as like for austerity reasons, I don't think they'll be kind of for that.
You and then you. You have the mic?
I don't, but I'm pretty loud, so that's okay.
Well, I think for the TV or the streaming, they need it right here.
Hi, yes. So over the last probably 12 years, I spent a lot of time talking to my dad about politics, and particularly as somebody who is more conservative, more moderate leaning, he and I have a lot of back and forth about how people are voting. And he's talked a lot about, you know, everybody should just take the party out of it and vote for the people. Like, if you like them, vote to keep them in. If they're not doing something you're happy with, vote them out, regardless of party affiliation. And so he's also talked about, in that vein, talked about how when we have these really divisive races like this, that whoever's in office, it is going to be, that party is getting voted out. If we have if it's really, really strong race, it's just going to go back and forth. And because of timing, that seems to be relevant, especially as we went from, you know, Bush to Obama to Biden, to Trump, and then Biden, and now back to Trump. I'm curious as to what you all think about like party line voting and how that affects the outcome of this race, but and particularly in future races in general.
You go.
Well, I think the Democratic Party's got a branding issue. I really do. I've been a Democrat my whole life. I was raised in a political family. But I think we have a problem. And, you know, the fact that Luke has gone over some of the stats out of this race, but the white working class are in a bad place with. Latino male voters, even losing more black male voters. We are just losing, and even in the blue states, Kamala Harris only won by 5 points in New Jersey. She slipped at the top of the ticket in the state of Illinois, where I'm from, a very blue state. So I think the whole party I think we need to blow it up and start fresh. I really do. I think we're in a bad place. And I think if you're a moderate Democrat, you're vilified by the left. And I'm a moderate Democrat, and frankly, I got very tired of the fights that I had within my own party. I knew what to expect from the other side of the aisle. I knew that, and those fights never bothered me. But I had way too many fights from within my party, and I got really, really tired of that. And my emotion that's attached to this election, frankly, I'm kind of stuck in the anger mode right now, and you look at the cycle of grief, and I'm just kind of stuck there right now, and it's like, I think if you want to play the blame game, there's a lot to go around in a lot of different places. Luke?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, and I would say this, there's all kinds of state laws, and there's all kinds of, barriers to there be an emerging third party. But I will tell you this, that most Americans are tired of the fact that their two choices, like a third of what they're for, they hate. Most Americans are tired of it. And I think if you've kind of lived through it your whole lifetime, you're kind of used to, well, okay. But you are in this strange spot, and I do think some of this crazy flip of votes and patterns you can't see, you have to realize that, most of those people that are voting ways that you don't understand why they did, they just decided, yeah, I guess the third of the stuff I like that guy's for, I'm going to overlook the other.
Yeah, I get along with moderate Republicans very, very well. I mean, so to your point about like a third party.
But I have to say this, right, and forgive me for, the challenge is, even moderate's a terrible word, right? Because it somehow suggests, it sort of
reasonable.
Suggests that you don't care, right? It suggests that you're not passionate about it, or you're not excited about it.
That means you want to get things done. I mean, I don't even know what you want to call it, but I think people who are willing to compromise, those people who we served with, who weren't afraid to work across the aisle, who would walk, on the House floor, you've got that center aisle where the president comes down for the State of the Union and all the cabinet secretaries and the Supreme Court justices. How we sit is Republicans are on the one side, and that's where the term across the aisle came from. Democrats are on the other. Look at the Democrats who never cross that aisle to go talk to members of the Republican Party. And frankly, I want members of the Democratic Party to feel comfortable doing that. And those are the kind of people I want to support. I have voted for many, many Republicans in my life, many, if I thought they were the better person. So I voted for Republicans this last election on my ballot. I voted for several Republicans. So
me too. I voted for Republicans. I also voted for some Democrats too. So,
but anyway, that's my answer. I think the Democratic Party, just really needs a whole makeover. And
all right, we still have 10 minutes at least.
He had a question, and then over here.
We'll try to do speed round answers. I'm the worst. I'm the worst at it.
Well, we're okay on time. We've got 9 minutes.
The question is about the use of force. Chairman Mao said that power comes out of the end of a barrel of a rifle. And we saw what happened in the debates with Biden when Mr. Trump stood up and said, "Proud Boys, stand down but stand ready." We saw what happened on January 6th. We have a person that ran for president who blatantly said, pointedly said, how would Elizabeth Cheney feel in front of 9 rifles? My question is more direct, though. I've read that members have resigned from Congress because congressmen and women have been threatened about their votes. Is that a fact?
Yes.
Why isn't that story told? Why isn't that story announced? We need to know that if that's what's happening, because it's by force that our government will be taken from us. Benjamin Franklin said it. We gave you a republic. It's yours to keep. It's ours to keep.
But I do want to say this to you. Folks of both parties have been threatened by folks of both philosophies It's not a one-sided, it's not as if it's only Democrats that have been hearing from folks on the other side and they're stepping out or not doing it because of it. I mean, I used to have police officers at all of my public meetings because I had threats, and it wasn't by conservatives. To be clear.
My guess is it's a little bit more disproportionate, though, when you look at the larger level. I mean, it was really interesting on election night when Donald Trump was saying that there was massive fraud in, I think, Pennsylvania when he thought he was going to lose Pennsylvania
Guys,
earlier
Donald
in the
Trump
night.
was shot in the ear. He was shot in the ear.
Well,
I mean,
hold on.
come on. I mean,
Hold
like,
on, Luke.
it's not disproportionate. I mean, I'm not going to stand here and hear that conservatives, I mean, I don't want to get fired up, but this is a national problem. It is not a conservative problem.
Okay, let me finish my
It wasn't a
thought.
conservative that shot President Trump in the ear.
It wasn't? I think it was. But let me just finish my thought. I was on the House floor on January 6th, okay? That is why my family, we made a family decision that I was not going to run for re-election. That was a last straw for my family. Had Kamala Harris won this election, do you think that everything would have been peaceful and calm and
I think if she had won in the same way that Trump won, I think it would have, sure.
I don't think it would have been. But that said, to your answer, every member of Congress I know has gotten threats, Republicans and Democrats. I don't know anybody in Congress who has not gotten threats. So yeah, that is a part of the job, and it's very unfortunate. I think social media has played a big part of that, and I actually work with a group called the Council for Responsible Social Media that I think is doing really, really good work to get social media in a better place, and I think we need some legislation that will tamp down of course, freedom. I'm a former journalist, so freedom of the press is really important. Freedom of speech is very important. But I think social media plays a big part in the level of threats and the prominence of threats and stirring people up. And it's all done through an algorithm. January 6th, would that have happened without social media? I don't think it would have to the degree that it did. I mean, people were all, worked to a frenzy.
So I apologize. I wound up, here's why, right? Is that, again, I think I've been pretty candid with y'all. I'm not getting elected to anything ever again, right? And not because there's not a party for me right now. But these are my friends and neighbors and people I love, my family, and we have got to stop as Americans telling ourselves that the other side is awful. It's just, I'm not saying there's no one. I'm just saying 75 million Americans didn't vote that way. And I'm telling you, as Sherry said, everyone who's in Congress have been under threats. It's the crazy nation we live in, okay? And we've got to get to the other side of this. And I can tell you one of the things that I hear from my friends and family and everybody else that are big Trump supporters is they just find it ironic that every time Trump says something great like, hey, we'll cut taxes, no one wants to believe it. But every time he says something that you don't like, you're certain it's going to happen. And most people just don't process it like that. I mean, again, lots of promises are made that aren't kept. And, if you actually go through some of the substantive arguments of the last campaign, there were lots of areas where, frankly, Kamala Harris had an opportunity to modify or moderate her point of view on some core issues of the campaign and declined to. And Donald Trump was happy to. And so again, for someone who wasn't going to come to a forum like this, there's a world in which he didn't seem like the most radical person running.
We got time for one last question, and you've got your hand raised.
Sherry, we appreciate your comment about walking across the aisle, and certainly Bob Dole from
Yeah.
Kansas was the beginning, I mean, in our ages of
Yep.
that.
Yep.
So was
Old school politician, right?
Right, so was
the way
Lyndon
it was
Johnson's.
civil, yeah.
So I thank you for saying that, and I'd
And
like
Luke
to.
did the same too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and I'd like for you both to discuss, when is America going to be ready to vote for a woman?
Oh, gosh.
Because what did that play in that, a man who said, I can stand up in Times Square and shoot somebody and they'll still vote for me, and who's convicted of 34 counts. So please.
You know, I don't know. As I told you the last time we were together, I thought she was going to win. And I thought it was going to be the female voter that was going to help make that happen because of what's happened with, especially like women's reproductive rights and taking, you know, our daughters and granddaughters having less rights than we've had. So I thought that was going to do the trick. You know, I don't know. I certainly hope that it happens sooner rather than later with the right person. I'm not going to vote for a woman simply because she's a woman, I will tell you that. But I'll vote for the right woman, just like I will vote for the right man. So we'll see what 4 years brings, and who's going to run, and who comes out on top. So I hope it happens. But
you know, I'm a husband of a wife who's far more talented, capable, and professional than me. I'm a father of 2 daughters, and you know, you asked a sincere question, I'll give you a sincere answer. I think it could happen today. I think it is politics, you know, it's a fascinating story. Think of both Bob and Elizabeth Dole, both of them people who could have been president, but some of it's capability, ability, and timing, and being the right place at the right time. You know, I mentioned to you all earlier the story of the man whose name rhymed with Osama, with the middle name Hussein. But he was a very talented person who found the right time and surprised a whole bunch of people who never thought it could happen in this country. And I don't know if now was the time. I mean, I'm not suggesting that, but for reasons like just the incumbent party, and Donald Trump was going, you know, the incumbent party in a tough economy always struggles, and Donald Trump had the nomination locked up for the last 4 years, right? So this was going to be a difficult time for that reason, particularly in hindsight. But I think, you know, Mike Gretchen Whitwer, who's a really talented, capable campaigner in a Midwestern state that's, you know, got a lot of the sensibilities that elected Trump, and she's gotten herself elected, and that's just one of many, right? I mean, this lady right here has the kind of capabilities that, in the right timing, in the right place, could win. So I just, again, well, what do you make you laugh? I just think you could.
Yeah.
I think, you know, again, I've probably, you know, I've tried not to be obnoxious for 3.5 hours here together. And I probably, maybe I survived for 2.5, and I haven't done a great job, I feel like, this hour. But if I just want everybody, it's hard because none of us want to be pushed, and it's easy. You know, my wife, when I came here, she said, well, you know, I know you didn't feel like you really won anything, but remember, in that room, it's going to feel like you did, so don't gloat, you know what I mean? And I was like, well, okay, good insight. But I just think, you know, just as I would tell my kids, don't allow yourself to believe it's somebody else's fault you lost.
yeah.
Whatever it is you're doing, you got to evaluate what you can control. Don't allow yourself to believe, in this case, that 75 million Americans are awful people. They voted this way, so why? And don't allow ourselves to think that, like, this is the end of the American story. It's just the next chapter. And really, the people in this room, and your friends and neighbors, and your kids, and your grandkids, and they're the people who get to decide. And I mean, you know, appreciate the sincerity of your comments, but we still live in a nation of laws. And I know a lot of the people who work in the military. I know the people who work in law enforcement. I mean, I haven't seen the place yet where people are turning against the American people in unlawful ways, right? Because they're ordered by some whatever. I mean, I just trust that if we all stay vigilant, a nation that's been through many challenges is going to get through this one too. And who knows, it may turn out that we're better on the back end. That's often what's happened in America when we've gone through adversity.
And there's always the midterms in 2 years. So I will say
exactly.
that. Thanks, you guys. It was great to spend time with you over these. Who made it to all 3 of our little sessions? Nice.
Kind of you all. Thank you.
Yeah, very nice. Well, thank you. It was a pleasure. Look, we're all Midwesterners, so it's great to spend some time in Kansas and, you know, believe in democracy and believe in our system and stay involved. I think that's among the most important things that we can all do. All right, thanks you guys, appreciate it.